Thank you, Talise. Good morning, everyone. My name's Tom Gonzalez. I'm Manitoba Agriculture's vegetable crop specialist, and I'd like to welcome you to the 7th webinar of this year's 2021 Horticulture School Summer Webinar Series. Our horticulture team includes staff from Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development, Assiniboine Community College, and Agriculture Agri-Food Canada. And we're all very pleased to be able to provide extension information to both horticulture producers and industry staff. Today's webinar, as we've done in the past, will be in the form of a Q&A, and I'd like to encourage everyone, if you're listening, if you got questions related to anything to do with horticulture production, please type them into the questions feature on your screen, and we'll do our best to provide you with answers. Sort of the main thing we're going to discuss today will be fall soil testing. There'll be some other points we'll talk about, but I think before we get into that, Talise, could you please launch the poll questions for today?
Sure can. So our very first poll question is, how do you see yourself with the horticulture industry? Are you a producer of horticulture crops? Do you work in agri-supply or agribusiness? Are you government or university personnel or other? Looks like we have 67% voted so far. And that might be all the voting we get. Did you want me to close the poll?
Please.
All right, so it looks like 83% are government or university personnel and 17% are other.
Okay. It's good to know.
Do you want me to launch the second poll?
Absolutely. You just keep on going. Thank you.
All right, so second question. If you are a horticulture producer, what size is your farm? 0 to 4.9 acres, 5 to 14.9 acres, 15 to 49.9 acres, or 50 plus acres? We have 22% who voted so far.
There's no one who's a producer.
And that looks like all the votes we're going to get in.
Right on.
So it looks like we have 50% who have 0 to 4.9 acres and 50% to 5 to 14.9 acres.
Ah, okay. So if we could go to the next two questions before we start our discussion, that would be great.
All right. So if you are a horticulture producer, when do you soil test? Fall, spring, never, or rarely? I have 0% who voted so far. I think we can get a couple of votes. Maybe people are still deciding.
Well,
some of the seasons seem to merge together, so sometimes it's kind of difficult of what season we're actually on.
Well, if we're not gonna, I don't want to belabor that. If no one, I'd encourage anyone out there who wants to cast your vote, so to speak, go ahead, but we'll see.
So I do have 11%. I can go ahead and close the poll. Yes. So it looks like the results is we have 100% rarely.
Okay.
So that might explain the hesitancy in answering the question.
Absolutely.
So our last question. Yeah. If you are a horticulture producer, are you satisfied with the fertilizer recommendations you get on the soil test? Yes, no, or don't use them anyways?
I'm curious about this one. It's a running discussion I have with people, growers, so.
Well, and if the previous answer was rarely, we might not, there might not
Yeah.
be too many responses for this one.
Well, that in itself is quite telling.
And I have 0% who have voted so far.
Well, I don't think we're gonna probably get anyone then, so we dragged it out a little bit, so let's close it, I guess.
All right, polling is closed.
Okay. Well, thanks to Lise for doing that. Yeah, our first discussion point that we're going to get into is basically to do with fall soil testing, and I'd like to welcome John Hurd. He's the crop nutrition specialist with Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development. John, you got any thoughts?
Well, just that the first question was kind of a trick question, because really the fall soil testing, I don't know if that really applies to small scale horticultural growers. Have to remember the real objective of soil testing is to estimate what's available to next year's crop.
Right.
And it's a little early right now to be making those projections. We find that with some of the early soil testing that's been done by farmers, often in drought, yields have been restricted by drought, that there's a lot of carryover nitrogen. And that may or may not be the case for horticultural production. I know it is for my sweet corn, because my sweet corn basically ran out of water. So I'm expecting there's quite a bit of nitrogen there. But that doesn't mean it's going to be there next spring. Especially in a horticultural situation, I'm on sandy soil, and if I don't put a cover crop or something down there, there's a good chance that that nitrogen may be leached out if it gets wet,
Right.
or it may still be there if it stays fairly dry. So when I'm going to soil test, I'm not going to soil test now and let all that biology and chemistry happen between now and 6 months when I seed again. I'm going to sample in April. And so I expect that that is probably a prudent time if as a horticultural grower, if you have a smaller acreage and you have the facility, I wouldn't bother soil sampling in the fall, but you may wish to preserve some of the nutrients that are there. And I'm not very hip on cover crops in the northern Great Plains under dry conditions like what we've had. But if we're getting moisture, and if there happens to be a lot of nitrogen there, putting in a cover crop, or as far as I'm concerned, for crop farmers, volunteers of canola and wheat and oats, they do the same thing as a cover crop at no expense to you. They hold the nitrogen, they cover the soil, they stop erosion. So if you have a cover crop or something there, or if you want something, just scatter some cereal seeds, some larger seed, let something grow, and then you can, if it's an annual crop, it'll terminate itself with frost this fall. If you put down fall rye, well, then you've invited some tillage or herbicide application to take place next spring or late fall in order to get rid of it. One of the problems with cover crops that we're uncovering in the northern Great Plains is that the darn things do a great job of taking up nitrogen in the fall and a darn poor job of giving that nitrogen back to the crops next spring. And that has put us in a bit of a pickle, in that looks like there's some challenges with cover crops that we didn't suspect. So if you are using cover crops, be aware to kill them early. Don't let them go too long, or else they may cause you to need to buy more nitrogen fertilizer to make up the shortfall. Anyways, that's about all I have to say, is that no rush for horticultural growers to do soil sampling. The objective is to see what's available next year's crop, and that is, 6 to 8 months away. So you've probably got time to do sampling in the spring. That's where
Right.
I'll start with that, Tom.
Yeah, I appreciated the poll question with when do you soil test there? Certainly springtime would be more common. One of the things that I'm finding this year is, from talking with producers, is albeit they're all, the vast majority anyway, if not all, are irrigated, they're finding some anomalies in their in-season foliage testing for nutrients. And I think a lot of that, I think we can all agree that, supplemental irrigation is a good thing, but it's not rain. It doesn't provide the same soaking effect and the same growth patterns as would decent rainfalls. And the heat, when you combine the heat with the fact that really for 2 months or more, the only moisture in a lot of cases was through irrigation, we were seeing some anomalies in testing of foliage. Any thoughts? I don't want to put people on the spot, but any thoughts in the room on foliage testing?
Foliage testing. Yeah, Vikram's pointing at me. No, I think tissue sampling is the type of thing that sophisticated growers do to find out. But we also have to be aware that moisture situation in the soil can affect things.
Definitely.
And I think you guys have already covered the issue of blossom end rot.
Yeah.
I know you've done that in other sessions, and that's not a deficiency in calcium. Tons, literally tons of calcium in our soil, but we see that if we have ununiform watering in things. So I know you guys have covered that earlier.
I have a question here. Many of our growers for vegetables are small market gardeners and or colonies. How would you encourage them to have a soil test done? Can you just simply explain in a few sentences how the soil sampling is taken or done, and what does it cost, and is it cost benefit ratio is good or not?
Oh, okay. Good question. What incentive is there? I guess just greed and self-interest and wanting to be a good steward of the land. For greed, I say that it can help identify problems that you could overcome, and then you would benefit from that. One of the big things, horticultural-wise, Vikram, that I see is that people try to grow horticultural crops where they shouldn't,
Right.
where there might be salinity or problems like this that they're basically not going to be overcome unless you're going to tuck in some tile drainage and irrigate and flush salts away. So first thing a soil test does is identifies where you should not be growing horticultural crops. And then after that, then you're looking at nutrients. And one of the things, we can always put on more nutrients. Sometimes it's hard to take away excess ones. And nitrate, nitrogen, when it carries over, to my knowledge, it can cause great tops on potatoes, great tops on tomatoes, but poor fruit production.
That's absolutely correct in the sense that over fertilization with N, or not necessarily fertilization, but if there's carryover in and you didn't test and you add what you consider to be a normal amount and you already have a large carryover, you're encouraging production, vegetative production, which in the case of tomatoes and potatoes is required to bulk, but yet if that continues on, you're going to wind up with less yield of what you want to have, what's going to pay you money, in the sense the tubers underground or the tomato fruit on the vines. It's certainly going to delay maturity. And in our climate, anything, not just particularly this year, but just in general, anything that's going to delay maturity is probably working against you when it comes to economics. I know, John, you had talked about the idea of greed, you know, and motivation to soil test. Well, I would just agree with that in spades. Like, I mean, you don't need very many acres of horticulture crops to have thousands, tens of thousands of dollars of gross income on the line. So certainly I encourage everyone to spend the, you know, 30 to 70 bucks.
Yeah, I guess that's part of your question, Vikram. And Tom, thanks for bringing me back to that. A basic test is about $30, and one that analyzes most everything would be up to 70.
Yep.
So for me this year, that's the same as let me do the math here. That's about 9 dozen corn.
Right.
So it's spending 9 dozen corn to get a full analysis of all the nutrients.
Right.
So surely to goodness I can justify that type of expense.
So for a market gardener, they would probably do the soil sampling themselves. Can you give a few steps?
Yeah, I still do sample to 2 feet, and the top 6 inches is for your immobile nutrients, your phosphorus, potassium, your micronutrients. And the deeper sampling is generally for nitrogen, although it also gives us good indication of sulfur. And those are nutrients that, like I say, for horticultural operations, often nutrients are not grossly deficient. Sometimes they're high, but it is just good to monitor those to know that we're in a sufficient range. Like I mentioned salinity. Salinity is measured on both the shallow and the deeper depths. I sample by hand because I happen to be on some sandy El Mississippi type soil. So it's quite easy to sample by hand. And it may well be the best way on a small acreage to do that. You can justify. Yeah. If you have a large acreage, there's a very good service providers that have truck-mounted probes that actually could do an excellent job of sampling that. And if, for example, you're connected with a commercial grain farm or something, you may just choose to have those acres done at the same time. But again, you know, those samples are going to be kept very separate. And now it gets back to one of my questions I put earlier is, what about the recommendations?
Right.
Not all commercial labs are set up to make a garden or commercial vegetable crop recommendations.
That's correct. That's a bit of a rub sometimes.
And so earlier in this series, Tom, you and I spoke about I'm a big fan of the University of Minnesota guidebook, which you could take your soil test from AgVise, A&L, Farmer's Edge. You can take the numbers right off of those soil test reports and look at that Minnesota book and get a second opinion. Likewise, we do have our own Manitoba guidelines developed, oh gosh, pre-1992 when we had a laboratory. And you're going to take those same numbers off of Farmer's Edge, AgVise, and A&L and apply. So we do like to say that there are places we can get a second opinion on those. Even Ontario, if you choose to use they print their guidelines So don't feel hamstrung. Don't feel that you're stuck with the printed guidelines that the company provides you. You do have some public sources that you can look at, which may be a more conservative guideline than what some of the commercial labs may be fertilizing for some very aggressive yield goals.
And I think part of what we need to realize is a bit of location of where those recommendations come from. Like, let's say Ontario's recommendations or Minnesota's, their growing season is a little bit longer and their need for nutrition is a little bit higher because they're going to have longer season varieties. They're able to grow varieties with a little more yield potential. And just getting back to the Minnesota guide that you and I talked about, John, a couple of months, I can't forget how long ago it was. I did get 2 unsolicited responses from attendees saying how grateful they were to have had that mentioned when they went to get that publication off the site at Minnesota, and how they think that's going to be a benefit to their farm. And yeah, that's kind of, to me anyway, that shows that that's something that people were looking for. If 2 people go out of their way to say, hey, you know, this is going to help me, how many people is it going to help that just didn't bother to say, you know? So I think in a way, this double checking that we're talking about, having that additional source is a good thing. I'm all for it, kind of thing. 2, when it comes to like the nutrient in-season nutrient testing, be it maybe in potatoes, pedioles, or even pedioles of tomatoes, or whatever it is. It's not the most commonly done thing, but depending on how aggressively you are approaching your fertility management, it can be an integral part of trying to maximize what you have there. We spoke a little earlier with the scenario of having carryover nitrogen, and if you didn't soil test, you maybe put down what you considered a normal amount of nitrogen again, and all of a sudden you have too much. Well, when you're doing pediole testing, say in tomatoes, just as an example, you're going to notice that sooner, albeit if you've done all your N up front, you're not going to be able to change anything, you know. But if you have, your plan is to split your N, which is quite common, especially under irrigated conditions, you then have the opportunity to not instantly turn the ship 180 degrees, but to start a bit of a turn to reduce that amount and hopefully get yourself a little more bang for the buck.
Yeah, I'm looking across the table at Tom, and I'm saying, Tom, be patient. Be patient. Hopefully, we're in this horticultural business for more than 1 year at a time, and I look at in-season tissue testing to also point out where long-term changes can be made, or to assess your current fertility program. This year, for example, in my own sweet corn, although my soil test levels indicated that I'm adequate for potassium on my sandy soils, I had full-blown nutrient deficiency showing up there. Under dry conditions, potassium on our soils tends to be trapped between the clay sheets that are there. And so am I going to do something in season? No, potassium's not going to move very much in the soil, but you better believe I am going to beef up my fertility program for future years and try to address that. So whether your tissue sampling points that out, hopefully your soil sampling will point it out, but certainly observations. And with sweet corn, I'm kind of lucky in that it is like a canary in the coal mine. Like the visual symptoms of deficiencies on corn are quite distinctive, and that is what allowed me to identify this problem that caught me off guard this year.
Right. Yeah, and I suspect that you're not alone in seeing that, given the conditions. Just want to have a quick look, see if there are any questions anybody has come in with. If I can get my mouse to work here. No, I'm not seeing any. Okay. Well, we can certainly circle back to that if there are any questions that come up. Maybe we'll just move on just a little bit here, and let's see, where are we here? Okay, we got some, talked about how to do the questions. And Vikram, we were talking, or you were mentioning, sorry, that you know, this type of year that we're having has the potential to cause some defects in tomatoes. Want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I recently got a call from a couple of growers, and they were complaining about how bad their tomatoes were. I didn't get the photographs from them, but this is what I have seen myself. And he had growth cracks on the tomatoes. The growth cracks happen because there is a sudden availability of water after a dry spell, and the tomatoes or even potatoes cannot keep up with that growth.
Right.
And so basically the outer skin just splits open. The pattern is very interesting. Some of the large tomatoes would split with a ring on the top, concentric ring, and the others which have vertical split. Whichever way, that may be more characteristic of the varieties.
Yeah.
These are going to basically lead to a rotting of the fruits. Some right on the vine itself. The storability will be very reduced. So my recommendation to the grower who called was to basically harvest anything which looks yellowish or starting to mature, because that he can try to mature inside the sheltered area, or basically just use it right away, because many of these will not store properly. So that is my point on that one. One of the best ways to avoid this is to have regular irrigation. Also, some varieties are more tolerant to this kind of breaking. I have a variety called Black Crim, which I love, and that one just splits for even if you water it 2-3 times, a bit extra, and leads to a lot of rotting. So just a point there.
Yeah, and I think your comment about varieties, some varieties being more prone or less prone to those types of injuries is exactly true. And the variety you mentioned is more of a heirloom style variety, and like a lot of heirloom style tomatoes, the skin is not as thick as some of the newer hybrids.
Correct.
And that exacerbates the conditions with a thin skin. The crack becomes bigger.
Yes.
The potential for cracking and
That's very true.
that kind of thing. Do you want to go ahead here,
Yep.
Lynn?
We'll go to the next slide. And
Sorry, I went too far. Gotta get around here. Previous. Sorry.
okay, some of you may be seeing stink bugs on your tomatoes right now, and there would be 15-20 at one on one fruit, and these stink bugs probe and pierce, and then they feed. With that, while they're doing this, they release certain enzymes into the fruit so that they can feed properly, which leads to star-shaped discoloration, and this is not just surface. If you cut open the skin, you will have a certain part of the meat which has become yellow and is very hard. So that may be a lost cause, but if you close your eyes, you can maybe still eat it.
The aesthetic quality of a tomato that's had infestation of stink bugs feeding on it is definitely not up to the standards of today's retail. I personally have eaten those tomatoes just by trimming.
Yes.
There's no health hazard from a human perspective.
But if you're marketing, that is lost.
Yeah, again, depending on what your market is, potentially roadside stand kind of marketing, you might get away with it in the sense, it's not as critical, the aesthetic appeal, as say being on a shelf in a retail store. I think we talked about it last week, but I just want to go one slide farther. We did see this year what looks like could be stink bug damage on peppers, and we have talked about it, but it's just something I had never seen over the years. I'd never seen that, and I'm curious if anybody else has. And after the last webinar, no one had sent me any note saying they have seen it as well, so maybe it's just isolated to peppers we're doing. I don't know.
This would be an issue in an open plastic house.
Yes.
Where you would have, free entry or exit for the insects.
Yes.
Yes, this is a typical symptom of a stink bug damage.
Right. Okay, just checking questions again. I don't see any. We're around half an hour. Anybody in the room have anything they'd like to either add to what we've talked about or something new? If you're any of the attendees, if you have any questions, certainly feel free to put them in the chat now. We're probably going to wind things down here in the next couple of minutes unless we have questions that come in.
Okay. I just want to add here, in the potato crop, the vines are now maturing, and as the vines mature, especially for the early maturing types, the leaves are showing a lot of leaf spots, and these could be mostly early blight, but in some cases these can be also the gray mold spots, especially within the crop canopy. Early in the season, if you see some of these spots, they could be confused with the late blight spots for the untrained eye. And at this moment, these leaf spots are not going to affect the yields or the quality significantly. So just for FYI.
All right. Now, just sticking with potatoes a bit, has there been, I'm not aware of any findings of late blight anywhere in our geographic region of the continent. Are you?
Yes, there has been late blight in Wisconsin. There was late blight in Ontario. We had spore traps in 2 sites in Manitoba also, but there was no late blight disease on the crop.
Right.
And so it appears that we will be free for the whole season now.
Right. Because if last I had read, Minnesota, North Dakota was also free.
Yeah, Minnesota and North Dakota are also free. We have issues in Maine and quite scattered, but overall it is much less compared to the previous year.
Right.
So it sounds like the Sasquatch to me.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got to go all the way to Maine to find it. Okay.
Well, still, I don't see any questions. So I'll go around the room one more time and ask gentlemen, anything you'd like to add or talk about? If not,
Please feel free to text, call, or email us any questions related to fertility, agronomy, pest management, and herbicides, those kind of things. We'll be very glad to help you out.
absolutely.
And my comments would be that if your crop is harvested and it's sitting out there, now that we've had some rain, and if you want to cover up and protect the ground, now's the time to get a cover crop out there.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to say this if it was still dry, but now that we've got a bit of moisture, let's get that covered so it doesn't blow this winter, and you can maybe hold some of that nitrogen that's there.
For sure. Okay, well, I'd just like to thank everyone that was here, John Hurd and Vikram Bish with me and Carmen. And thank you to the attendees. Your feedback and suggestions is certainly something that we value. So if you have any of those suggestions, comments, concerns, anything like that, feel free to send them to me. Next webinar in the series will be in 2 weeks. That'll be September 17th, and it'll be at that's a Friday. Be at 9:30 again, and I hope you're able to attend. And thanks again for joining us, and hopefully see you in 2 weeks. Have a good day.